Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's webcast. Our webcast today is titled From Alerts to Insight, How Agentic AI Elevates Security Teams, sponsored by Embed. To kick us off, I'm Stephanie Wall from SANS. And if you have any questions during this webcast today, please enter them into the Q&A window. Also note that this webcast is being recorded and a copy of the slides and this recording will be available for viewing within 48 hours after we are done. And you can find that on the SANS registration page. So with that, I'd like to hand this over to Christian Vidu, our SANS certified instructor.
Hello, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, depending on which time zone you're in. Thank you very much, Stephanie, for the intro. As Stephanie mentioned, my name is Christian Vidu. I will be your host for tonight's webcast. I'm a SANS certified instructor under the Blue Team Cyber Defense curriculum. I'm teaching the Sec 450 course. And tonight I have the pleasure of being joined by two highly experienced cybersecurity practitioners turned founders. I have Seth Somerset and Dr. Jeffrey Jones joining me tonight. Both have an impressive background. Seth has 10 years of working at NSA before moving to the private sector and holding leadership roles at Mandiant and FireEye. And most recently, he has held the position of head of security partners at Facebook. On the other hand, we have Dr. Jeffrey Jones. He has previously held data science and has previously led data science and engineering at Google Cloud Security. And before that, he also held leadership roles at Mandiant and FireEye where he was coordinating teams working on machine learning for detection, threat intelligence, and analyst workflows. Hello, Seth. Hello, Jeff. Welcome.
Good to see you. Good to be with you.
Hello.
Likewise. So, as Stephanie mentioned, in order for you to address questions, and please make use of them. You have two very experienced practitioners here with us. I also come with a hands-on experience background. Please use the Zoom's Q&A session. We will be monitoring it. We will try to get to all of the questions before the end. If there's any questions that you want to direct to a specific participant, to Jeff, to Seth, or to me, please mention our name so we know it's addressed to us. Otherwise, please post them in Q&A. We will get to them. We are seeing them, and we are looking at the Q&A, and we'll be getting to your questions. With that, let me go into the agenda for today. So first, we will start by talking about one of the challenges that we have, the problem with the investigations, the time it takes us. And before going into that, let me take you back just a little bit and look at overall at our SOC mission, and then we'll talk about how Agentic AI can help us. I think we can sum up our SOC mission quite easily. It comes down to identifying and responding to all threats. Problem with this, we have to go through multiple stages. The first one, the most basic stage, we need to investigate all of the alerts in order to be able to determine what actually happened. This takes time. Most of us spend a lot of time investigating those alerts. And in order to go to the more important parts of our mission, which is threat hunting, detection engineering, we need to finish the first one. Mandiant, actually, in the recent M-Trends report, said that the time to hand over from an initial access broker to a threat actor has shifted dramatically. Last year, it was in the matter of hours to days. According to Mandiant today, it's in the matter of seconds, which makes it a lot more important to actually finish and investigate all of those alerts. And if we're talking about threat hunting, we have an quite slightly older reminder of why looking for threats for which we have absolutely no alerts is important. The 2 years ago, 2024, we had the Dutch MIVDs telling us how the Chinese were present in their networks for 6 months before being detected. So that's another point that which we need to get. And last but not least, continued detection engineering. We need time in order to be able to fine tune the detections and have alerts. Now, that was the ideal. Now switching to reality. I know how your SOC looks like. I know how some of the SOCs in which I worked looked. I started the day in the morning. I had an alert queue of 50, 100 alerts. Halfway through the day, and after working on those alerts, I was looking at the queue and I had 200 more in the queue, even though I actually finished working through some of them. Problem was that I needed for each alert, I needed context. Adding context takes a lot of time. You need to move from one tool to the other, gather all of the context, understand what's happening. And building all of that context requires a lot of time investment from the analyst. And a lot of it's just taking information from multiple systems. As I mentioned earlier, if we miss some alerts, we are exposing ourselves to risks. Mandiant is saying this. And a lot of time, this means that we are stuck in a reactive mode. One of the fun jobs in the SOC is that proactive stance, threat hunting, looking for things that I didn't get any alert on, trying to search for an attacker for which I had absolutely no detection. And then after I detect, being able to allocate time to improve my detections, to build on those detections, to build on what I learned from my investigations, and improve my existing detection. So next time I would be able to detect a lot faster. If we're stuck in the reactive mode, a lot of times this leads to burnout. This leads to attrition. I've seen within the SOCs in which I worked in, and we are actually covering this as part of our Sec 450 course as well. Analysts who are burning out, who are no longer like to do the job because a lot of the job is just pulling context from multiple places. So why can't we just take all of the information and plug it into an LLM? We have Claude. You might probably you are using Claude. You are using ChatGPT, Gemini, or whichever other LLM. Why can't I just take an MCP, connect it to my SIEM, and let the LLM deal with it? One of the biggest challenges that LLMs have is the fact that they lack context. Lack context from both the perspective of cyber experience. They don't have that cyber experience background. Also from a perspective of context to the organization itself. Yes, they are very, very flexible, but sometimes maybe too flexible. But they are also at times unreliable. And the biggest challenge that I have is building trust in the LLMs, building trust in the agentic workflow so that I know that once it says that it added context, it investigated an alert, I'm actually able to believe that that alert was fully investigated. Especially since an LLM is not fully deterministic, it can choose to skip steps. It can choose to skip some of the phases. In the past, we used playbooks. They are awesome. Playbooks is the moment we can fully define them, and the moment we have a reliable workflow, they work perfectly. The challenge with playbooks is the fact that they are rigid. It's very difficult to have a playbook that evolves over time, and there's a lot of time that's invested into building and maintaining those playbooks. It's the fact that they require this high level of maintenance means that they can break quite easily. Now, with this, I like to switch over and talk a little bit about Embed's approach. I really liked one of the things that I really liked when I looked at the product and when I sat and talked to both Jeff and Seth was the goal that they set out for themselves. Their stated goal was we want an alert queue of zero. And what the thing that I liked about this was what sat behind it. The fact that the alert queue of zero meant that instead of me focusing and pulling context from multiple places and allocating time to fight through alerts, I can actually allocate my time to the more important things in the SOC. I can dedicate my time to threat hunting. I can allocate my time to the more important, to the more advanced things that I should be doing. Problem with and we mentioned it earlier, I talked about it earlier. Problem with agentic AI though is trusting it. This is at least my biggest concern. How much trust can I put in that agent? And how do I make sure that the agent actually does what it says it is doing? And this was the other part that I really liked about Embed's approach. The fact that it builds on transparency. It builds on the ability to validate data through the evidence. Their main focus has been to take a structured approach to this, but still keep it in order to keep it reliable, but still be able to leverage the power of large language models, agentic AI, in order to approach the decision steps dynamically. This way, it has the takes the good parts of both worlds. I have the dynamic capabilities of LLMs, but they are structured within the logic within the experience that was built from existing knowledge on how to investigate cyber attacks and how to investigate cyber incidents. With this, I will hand over to my guests, Jeff and Seth, and they will present how Embed's architecture looks like. Please.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Christian. So how do we actually investigate? The building block that is key to the way we've designed the system is something that we call an I step or an investigation step. Each I step is answering one investigative question, just like an analyst would break a problem down. And after that, we go through kind of three phases. The first phase is gathering additional evidence, then asking additional, sub questions based on that evidence, and lastly, drawing conclusions from that. So, for example, you see on the right an example I step. The question is the email impersonating a legitimate brand? And in the evidence gathering phase, all right, we can gather information from who is and sender reputation and DNS records that allow us to draw inferences and ask additional questions about the sender domain, for example. Or we'll also, if there are URLs in the email, go to those websites, take screenshots of the pages, and then we can run machine learning models against those to help us detect brands and potential spoofing that way. All of that is, one step in the process. After that, right, we'll ask questions where the answers will be tied to the evidence that we've gathered. And then lastly, we'll draw those conclusions. And importantly, that structure that we get in this process, we call that the chain of evidence. If an analyst is looking at these conclusions, they could go directly back to those sub-questions that we're asking and the evidence that they're based on. So transparency of that reasoning is really important. If you go to the next slide, I'll share a little bit about zooming out from the I steps to the big picture. So in this case, right, we have an alert coming in. Right, how are the I steps being used? The alert comes in and goes to a lead agent. And the lead agent is the one that is planning the investigation and is aware of all the I steps in our library, and it can select and sequence those. In the middle of the investigation, right, depending on what comes back, it can adapt and select different iSteps based on the content that it has. All of that goes into then, once we've kind of run that investigation down with all of the steps in the process, goes to a report that a person can look at along with the tailored recommendations that we make for further next steps they could take or response actions. And then we'll learn from the analysts as well. So the analyst can provide us feedback, and that can go into a system that we call Noise IQ. That's our context graph, and it's important because it allows us to learn information that's not necessarily in the data that the agents have access to, but maybe is kind of baked in the heads of people who are in the SOC doing that day-to-day work. But now, if we leverage and can collect that information, it becomes accessible for future investigations. So this gives a sense of kind of the big picture of how those pieces fit together. And Seth could take us through an example, kind of showing this in action.
If I can ask you a question, Jeff, I'm one thing that I was curious because you are really experienced in exactly this part. I'm an analyst, but you have the experience in machine learning, data science. Why is it better to use iSteps than just dumping everything into an LLM, giving an MCP to Claude, ChatGPT, you name it, and letting it deal with the data?
That's a great question. It is tempting, right? It's very easy to do to be able to say, hey, I've got 50 MCP servers that are relevant for security tests, hand those over to Claude and say, please investigate this alert. The problem there is reliability. Asking, for example, that lead agent to be able to sequence all of the different steps that you might want to perform, all of those tool calls, um, the reliability that you would get out of that, it would be very poor. And so that's why we've kind of introduced iSteps as a meaningful structure that make it easier for that lead agent to be able to sequence those appropriately without having to worry about kind of the gory details of, the MCP servers and all the tools that are available to it.
So if I understand correctly, these iSteps are what's are the experience that you're bringing into the product. This is exactly the cyber knowledge that is applied, and the agents leverage it afterwards, right?
That's correct. That's right.
Thank you. So should we switch from this to a demo and see the product in action? And then have, if there are more questions, we can discuss on top of the demo.
Sounds great. I will share the demo now.
Great, thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Christian and Jeff. So this is within the Embed product. This is where an analyst would first land. We didn't go through the bigger, broader architecture diagram of Embed, but we're an API-focused company, which basically means you can use our UI if you want, but anything that you see us doing today here is accessible via API, and it can be plugged into any workflow that you may have. If you have a SOAR that you already want to do the workflows in, it'll work there. If there's a ticketing system, it works as part of that as well. So all the investigations and details that I'll walk through will be available in those products as well. So if we step back here, we can see there's a number of different cases that would come in. An analyst would see the escalated cases. These are cases where Embed thinks that it's either inconclusive. Hey, we did a bunch of investigation, we gathered a bunch of context, and we weren't able to come to a definitive decision, and so we think a human should take a look at it. Or we believe it's malicious, and so we're escalating it so you can be aware and or take care of it. And then there's noise as well. So noise is where these are things that we believe are benign and can be taken away from the view of the analyst. But an analyst can easily click into that and look at it much in exactly the same way that you would an escalated case. So if we go back to an escalated case, you can see there's cloud cases, there's identity cases, we have endpoint cases, email, a bunch of different types of cases. But let's just hop into the one here at the top of the queue, which is a cloud case. And so the first thing we're trying to do for analysts is orient them, right? So this is the first piece that you'll see here is this orientation. And this is why is guard duty in this case even telling me about this alert. So we give a quick explanation about, it's a user that's trying to disable that it's basically trying to enable public access to a bucket. So immediately I have a feel for that, but then we also provide you some frequency information. Hey, we've seen this 8 times in the last 3 months, so you know how common the given alert is. So that orients the analyst to start with. And then we have key indicators, and these are 3 bullet points, maybe 4, maybe 2, but like just a few bullet points that help the analyst to see how Embed came to the conclusion that it came to. So right here, because we're hoping that analysts be able to come in here and really rapidly make decisions. And so we can clearly see there's multiple destructive API calls that are rare for this historically. And so based on that, that's probably something that somebody should take a look at, right? The actual API that Guard Duty was alerting on is actually been seen in past history for this particular user. And the user did authenticate using SSO through an expected geographic region. So you already have a good idea as an analyst that this is probably this user that's doing it. And that the behavior that originally alerted is probably not as strange as Guard Duty is trying to make it seem, but there were some destructive actions that were taken that have not been taken in the past. So that gives the analyst the ability. Now, sometimes the analyst may just make a decision here and come up to the actions and say they agree. But we want to allow analysts to progressively dig in. And so that's where you can come back down into this discovery. And on the right-hand side, you're going to see what Jeff and Christian were just talking about. These are the actual I steps. So there's an I step asking, was there any suspicious surrounding activity that occurred? There's another one down here of, was the authentication suspicious? What about the user history? Is the historical behaviors, is it strange? And so the analyst can dig in, and within each of these I steps, you'll be able to see yet again a few bullet points as to why we came to the conclusion of whether we think the I step is malicious, suspicious, or benign. And so in this case here, we can see these 3 bullet points that were brought up. There's multiple destructive API calls. There's several concerning API calls that are historically rare for this user. And you can click on these and disclose them and easily see the questions that Jeff was talking about, those sub-questions that are underlying here. And you can see what the answers to those questions are. And some of these questions, when you actually click in on them, for example, this CloudTrail one, you'll be able to see the question. You can see the answer. In this case, we're showing that they executed a delete access key, and that call was actually successful. So you can see all of the ones that they executed. But you can also come down here and see the raw data that was pulled out. And so that is all available for an analyst as well. If we hide the I steps for just a second, we can dig in even more detail into the artifacts that were pulled out. So you can see the IP address that was pulled out. You can see the enrichments that were done on that IP address. You can see the user agent string and what we think about that. As well as in the investigation, we give a timeline view as well. So if you select the timeline view, you can continue to dig in even more detail, and you can filter these out as you so choose. So if you filter these way down, you can actually get all the way down into the queries that executed, and you can even show the query logic that's going on. So this helps the analyst to progressively reveal the evidence, we call it chain of evidence, that was used to come to the decision that we came to. We don't want to present it all at once in a way that overwhelms the analyst, but we want it to be there and be available. So that way, if they want to dig in and they want to see how it came to the conclusion, they can trust it, they can see it, they can uncover it.
Can I ask you just one question here? What about how can I leverage multiple sources of data? Do I need to start with a lot of data? Can I start small? Do I need to start from a certain place? Here you had, apart from guard duty, sorry, you had a few other sources as well. Do I need to have them, or is it incremental process where I can add different type of sources which might provide additional context?
Yeah, you can absolutely incrementally add alert sources as well as context. Obviously, the more context you add into the system to start with, the better the investigations will be. But you can absolutely progressively add parts and pieces in. I didn't show it, but if you come down to this remediation section, we have some next investigative steps here. And this is where if you hadn't added a particular source, we would say, Embed does not have access to your SIM. Therefore, we were not able to run these types of queries, so we recommend you go run these queries. And so if you do not plug everything in, we can still do an investigation, but as you would imagine, the less context you have, the less robust the investigation will be.
Understood. Thank you. Now, one other question that I had in mind, maybe it was for Jeff earlier. How do you test this? Because I'm a guy who goes with the idea of trust but verify. So how do you make sure that the system is actually reliable and the agents do exactly what they are supposed to do?
Boy, that's a great question. And it's key to the system, right? To be able to do this well and do it reliably at the level that analysts expect. So unfortunately, there's not an open source benchmark for alert investigations, right? So we had to build that ourselves. And we did. We built data sets across all the different alert sources that Seth was showing. And we have metrics that we track across 3 dimensions. So we measure accuracy, and that's at the case level. Are we getting those escalate or noise predictions correct? It's also at the I-step level that we're making predictions and measuring accuracy. We also look at consistency to say if you ran this case multiple times, are you getting the same results? And then lastly, the third thing that we track, I think is really interesting, is what we call reasoning alignment. And so those key indicators that are on the screen here at the moment, right, in terms of what the system produces, how well does that align with what an expert would say, right, in terms of the reasoning behind decisions? All of those are kind of automatically measured. And as we iterate on the product, right, we're able to continuously test and make sure that we're making progress in the right direction and not regressing as we're making changes.
Thank you. If there is, I'm looking at the clock and I see that we have only 1.5 minutes more to go. So I will try to sum this up. Trying to sum up what for all of you watching this, there is a larger discussion, and I wrote a larger paper looking at how Embed works, some of the challenges in a lot more detail than we could have covered here in 30 minutes max. I would have loved to have more time with both Jeff and Seth. We had a few discussions before this, and it was really awesome to talk with both of them. But trying to sum up our discussion, the things that I really loved from working with the product, moving from working with individual alerts to full investigation. Instead of looking at an alert, pulling context, I'm looking at directly at the finished investigation where I have all of the context. I just need to make a decision. Is it something that I need to escalate right now? Or is this something that maybe I can leave for later? But the whole move of moving the data back and forth, pulling into the investigation, that's something that's already done for me. This allows me to move to that strategic level, to the high value strategic defense, threat hunting, detection engineering, things that we love to do as analysts, but generally we don't have enough time. And last but not least, I will just mention this one. the fact that I'm able to see and verify exactly everything that happened in the flow. This is something that, for me at least, in order to build confidence, is really important. With this, because I'm looking at the clock and I'm seeing that we're exactly at 30 minutes sharp, I will hand over to Stephanie. Thank you very much for joining us today. Please read the white paper, and if you have any questions, please post them in the Q&A. Thank you. And thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Seth. Stephanie, handing over to you.
Thanks, Christian. And yes, thank you, Christian. Thank you, Seth, and thank you, Jeff, for a great presentation today. And especially thank you to Embed for sponsoring this webcast. For a schedule of all of our upcoming webcasts, please see our webpage at sans.org/webcasts. And until next time, thank you for joining us today, everybody. We look forward to seeing you at our next webcast, and have a great day. Bye, everyone.